Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. We have a marathon of a podcast coming your way today. A lot to talk about in the world of Kansas. We're going to take a deep dive into the Kansas versus TCU game this weekend, talk about some of the recruits who will be on campus to take in that game and everything else going on around the world of Kansas football. We've got a few guests lined up. We're going to start out with an interview with Jeremy Clark. He covers TCU for 24/7 Sports. He's been doing it for a long time and does a great job. And we're going to get some really good insight and information into TCU from Jeremy. After him, we'll have Jack Ritter back on. We'll talk about the week that was with media availabilities, how we're feeling about the game, some keys to the contest, all that good stuff. And then we'll wrap up with some recruiting chat at the very end. So, as I said, long podcast coming your way. Hope you all enjoy and hope everyone's had a great week so far. Without further ado, let's dive right into this. Let's get to this interview with Jeremy Clark. All right, we are now joined by Jeremy Clark of HornedFrogBlitz.com. We're going to take a deep dive into the Kansas versus TCU matchup. Jeremy, it's been a bit of an up and down start to the season for TCU. I remember watching them week one, road win over Stanford. I thought that was a really positive start to the season, but the last 2 weeks haven't exactly gone TCU's way with the loss at UCF and then losing to SMU this past weekend. Being around the team this week, right? I know you guys do media on your Tuesdays. What was kind of the vibe being around them on Tuesday when everyone's starting to talk?
Well, it's that time of the year, Michael, where when coaches say things or players say things, the fans don't really care. It's about getting it done on Saturday, but the coaches and players seem like their vibe is good. I mean, Sonny said that Sunday and Tuesday's practice went well. Jack Besh and Eric McAllister, two receivers that are really having big years. They met with the media and they felt like the practices were going well. They understand there's obstacles out there. They understand there's people talking about certain issues with the team. Those two guys are really getting the job done. I think the fans want to see some guys up there that aren't getting the jobs done and get the answers to the questions of why those things aren't going well. But overall, I think the biggest thing is that if there's a silver lining out of that whole SMU game, it's not a conference game. They're still only 0-1 in Big 12. They showed UCF's a good team. UCF's got a lot of talent, and they were up in that game 28-7, 31-13 at one point. If they could just figure out a few things, figure out how to stop the run a little bit, figure out how to get themselves running the ball a little bit, I think they're going to be fine. But they understand there's still a lot to play for. And with the Big 12, the parity that it has this year, I think everyone understands it's still pretty wide open for them.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I want to go back a little bit because obviously, right, the last time these two teams played was 2022. College game day was there. It was a iconic game, maybe iconic second half rather than a full game. But for TCU, last year was a down year. How did the coaching staff approach building this roster out for this year? What were some of the areas of weakness maybe that they saw from last year's team? And how do you feel like they tried to address that and go about building out this roster to try and get back to that winning way and being a competitor at the top of the Big 12?
Well, I think, when you had 22, especially you talk about that KU game, I still remember that atmosphere. That was crazy, just walking up, parking, and just seeing the crowd out there for game day. But the one thing I say about 22 is they had a really senior-heavy team. It's a team that had been around for 3 years. Quentin Johnston wasn't a senior, but he had been a starter since a true freshman. They had a lot of guys that had played a lot of college football, and ultimately a guy like Max Duggan, who was a senior, they just knew how to finish games. And last year, 23, they didn't really have those guys. They didn't have not only the talent, but really the guys that have played a ton of college football. They went 5-7, but they lost 3 of those games by a combined 9 points, kind of like what KU's going through this year, playing those close games and just not being able to finish just through small mistakes. But I think what they did in the offseason, they tried to go out and get some older players. They tried to get guys that don't necessarily have the blue blood name across the chest or the logos on the helmets. They just went out and tried to find some guys that have played a lot of college football. The big thing for them is it's not about the name on the jersey. It's about the production. And so you're going to see them go after guys that are from Louisiana Tech that have played a lot of football, guys from San Diego State that have played a lot of football. They'll still go after those guys that are coming in from bigger schools. They've got a defensive end from Notre Dame that was kind of a role player for Notre Dame, but he's come in and he's become a starter for TCU at defensive end. And so they're still going to go out and try to find those guys from big name schools, but ultimately they want guys that have played college football and have played a lot of college football. And any guy that has played over 20 games in their career, that's a huge plus for them.
Yeah. And so for you watching this team, you mentioned the running defense aspect of it. I think that's probably where we need to start, because that's something that Sonny Dykes talked about. I thought he made a really interesting comment that he expects KU to run the ball 75 to 80% of the time in this game, just because of how A, good KU's run offense has been, and B, how bad TCU's run defense has been. Has that surprised you maybe this year? I guess how poor maybe TCU's run defense has been. It's back-to-back weeks of about 225 yards and about 5 yards a carry or so. Has that surprised you, how TCU has struggled in that aspect?
Yeah, it really has, especially the last 2 weeks. I mean, they did a fair job against Stanford, and I mean, Stanford went out to Syracuse last week and beat a top 25 team. So, I mean, Stanford's not a bad program, but you get this kind of the way I do. We go out to practices, we go out to spring camp, and we go out to fall camp, and we get to see some things. And sometimes you think certain things are good, but when you get to a game, they're not so good. So was TCU's run defense, it looked really good in fall camp, but was that because the offensive line for TCU so bad? And we're kind of seeing a mixture of things right now. Maybe that defense looks so well playing against the run in fall camp because we know TCU can't block right now in the run game. So when I look at it, the UCF game was very eye-opening. Even though they got down 28-7 and they were down 31-13, UCF never shot away from their game plan, which is to run the football. And KJ Jefferson's a big-time quarterback. He's not going to beat you with his arm routinely, but he is going to wear down defenses because he's such a big body. And RJ Harvey, I'll tell you right now, he's probably he's definitely one of the top running backs in the Big 12, if not the top running back. And that's a list that includes Ollie Gordon. So RJ Harvey, the way he's playing right now behind that big offensive line they have, it's going to be hard for teams to combat that a little bit. But missed tackles, just not being aggressive on the defensive line. I think losing Dominic Williams to Oklahoma was obviously a big loss. Didn't put up huge stats, but he was able to take on double teams and kind of opened up the defense for other guys on that defensive line. And I tell you right now, the linebacker play hasn't been as sharp as I thought it would be. You have some good quality guys, and really it was a defensive position that I thought was the best position on the field. I mean, for talent-wise, athleticism, experience, I thought that was going to be a huge group for the defense this year, and they just really haven't shown up to play a whole lot. I mean, they're not making a ton of plays out there. And when your cornerback is leading the team like it was last week against SMU in tackles, you've got a huge issue. I mean, when SMU threw the ball less than 20 times, and yet you have a cornerback that's in the top 3 in tackles. So, you're not getting to the running back fast enough with your front 7, and your secondary is having to make tackles, and that's not a good sign. But it's not going to be easy this week. I mean, you're coming into a team that's run heavy. Jalen Daniels, they've obviously struggled against running quarterbacks. Jalen Daniels is one of the best in the nation. Devin Neal is obviously a great running back. Kansas's offensive line is one of the better offensive lines in the Big 12. So if TCU doesn't figure out a way to at least slow the league, not stop the league, but just slow the league a little bit, it's going to be another long day for them again.
Yeah, and so I'm curious, with obviously the TCU has a new defensive coordinator and Andy Avalos, how much has been a acclimation process, you feel like, to having a new defensive coordinator, right? KU's going through a very similar thing with Jeff Grimes on offense, where I think you've seen improvement week over week over the first 4 kind of games of the season, but it still maybe hasn't clicked like I think a lot of people expected going into the year. I mean, has Avalos tried to change things with the way TCU is running defense? Talk to us a little bit about kind of how that transition has gone with the new defensive coordinator.
Well, I mean, compared to last year, the last 2 years, really, it was the 3-3-5. It was, you had the bigger defensive linemen, bigger defensive ends, and it was kind of a bend, don't break defense. There wasn't a whole lot of quarterback pressure, and that's one thing that everyone was excited for when Andy got hired is when he was at Oregon, it was a pressure the quarterback defense. You're blitzing from all different angles on the field. And the defense was designed to get takeaways and pressure the quarterback. In fall camp or spring camp starting out, we were like, man, this defense looks completely different. I mean, it looks awesome. The players are having fun. Fall camp, it carried over. There was one scrimmage that they had in fall camp where the defense, the first, second, third team collectively had like 13 sacks. And so you're thinking, okay, well, this is a good sign. They're really having trouble with this TCU defense. First game against Stanford, 10 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. But since that game against Stanford, you've had 6 tackles for loss, 2 sacks against Long Island, only 3 tackles for loss, no sacks against UCF, 2 tackles for loss, no sacks against SMU. So you've had hardly any quarterback pressure the last 2 weeks. You've had hardly any plays behind the line of scrimmage that they're making the last 2 weeks. So the things that we saw that were positive in that game against Stanford, it's really regressed the last 2 weeks. We don't know what we're going to see. We don't know if they're going to be able to get any type of pressure on Jalen Daniels. We don't know if they're going to be able to fill the gaps and get a tackle, at least at the line of scrimmage, not behind the line of scrimmage, but at least at the line of scrimmage, and not waiting to see a tackle. The first contact you make is 4 or 5 yards downfield. So last week against SMU, we saw a lot of 3-man fronts. We saw a lot of, hey, let them run the ball to us. It was kind of reminiscent of what we saw the previous 2 years under Joe Gillespie. So it had a lot of people scratching their heads. A lot of fans were complaining about it. We don't know what the answer is because what we've seen the last 2 weeks is completely different from what we saw during fall camp and really in that game against Stanford. So your guess is as good as mine, Michael, about what we're going to see against Kansas. I don't know how they're going to approach it.
Really interesting. So I guess, that's definitely something to watch then. First, second quarter. How's TCU approaching this game? We'll switch to offense. I think Hoover is probably the best quarterback KU's gone against this year. And the wide receiver core is one that got Lance Leipold the raving about him during the week. Let's start with Hoover. Obviously, I know he's started at the end of last year. What sort of jump have you seen from his game from last year when he was just starting or beginning to start games, and now when he is undoubtedly the starting quarterback?
I think the biggest thing with him is his season's kind of being overshadowed by the lack of run game, the lack of defense. I mean, this is a team that could easily be 3-1. It could potentially be 4-0 without some of the mistakes they've had. But Josh is having a really good year. He's always been a guy that's been a leader. The teammates love him. He's a film junkie. He's going to watch film. He's going to look for tendencies on his opponents, good and bad. And he's going to have himself prepared. He's going to bring in his receivers and have them prepared too. I think that's why you've had a really good passing game so far. It's not just teams are selling out to stop the run and they're going to let TCU pass. I don't think any opponent wants to let Josh Hoover sit back there and dissect him the way he has this year. I mean, I think he's 3rd or 4th in the FBS in passing yards right now, 7th in touchdown passes. He's getting the job done. Struggled a little bit last week against SMU because I think he's starting to feel the weight of moving the ball on his shoulders. He's getting absolutely no help. And when I say no help, I'm talking to the tune of 58 rushing yards against UCF, 65 rushing yards against SMU, and most of those yards came in the 4th quarter when the game's well out of hand. So you're talking about a team collectively through the last 2 games that have barely rushed for over 110 yards. I've covered this team long enough where I've seen this rushing offense get over 110 yards in one quarter of play, let alone 2 games combined. So I think with Josh, he's kind of pressing a little bit. He was kind of off and on with the throws, a little bit more consistent than what we've seen really through last year and even the first few games this year. But if Josh Hoover's not quarterback for TCU right now, they're 0-4. I'll put it to you plain and simple. Without him moving the football, they're 0-4. I mean, I'll say 1-3. They would have beat Long Island, but they're not winning the game against Stanford. They're not playing close like they are against UCF, and they're not even in the battle like they were against SMU. Receivers are standing up. Their receiver group is extremely talented. They have, I believe, 3 guys in the top 20 in the Big 12 in receiving yardage. J.P. Richardson is just outside that top 20. Between those four guys, JP, Jack Besh, and Eric McAllister have all had 100-yard games this year. And Savion Williams, he hasn't had a 100-yard game, but he's had a 2-touchdown game. He's one of those guys that when NFL scouts come to watch TCU's practice, he's the first guy on top of their list. 6'5", 225 pounds that can run. He's a guy that Josh Hoover fell in love with. He's going to throw him the ball. He's going to count on him in the red zone. So that's a guy, if TCU gets to the red zone, that would definitely be a guy that Josh Hoover's going to go to. He's going to try to see if Savion can come down with the pass. But, yeah, man, Josh, I feel bad for him because I really feel like if TCU was sitting 3-1 and right on the cusp of the top 25 right now, more people would be talking about him. But like I said earlier, there's still a lot of season left to go. If he goes out there and has a huge game against Kansas, I mean, it can vault him up the list a little bit of people thinking good about him.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the offensive line there. Let's dive a little bit into that. So, I mean, how many new faces are there on the offensive line? And do you expect a change from what you've seen the first, or I guess last 2 weeks when they take the field against KU this weekend?
There's a lot of new offensive linemen. I mean, they went heavy on the offensive line through the transfer portal. At one point, you had 4 or 3 transfer guys starting for them up front on the offensive line. James Brockemeyer at center, transfer from Alabama. Bless Harris is playing left tackle, transfer from Florida State. Carson Bruno, right guard, transfer from Louisiana Tech. Remington Strickland, transfer from A&M. He's kind of played a lot of that left guard and right guard position. The thing that I've kind of gathered through the first 4 games, it just doesn't seem like – now they're going to say this, and I've asked Sonny about it twice now. I asked him after the game Saturday and asked him again on Tuesday. Do they feel like they have a consistent starting 5, or is it still an open competition? Because we've seen guys come in. Ben Taylor Whitfield came in and played right tackle. And that's another thing. I mean, the guys that they have that are older players, Mike Nichols starts at right tackle. He probably had the worst game of all of them last week against SMU, and he was pulled late in the game. And so it's a situation where I don't know if it's necessarily all about the X's and O's. Sometimes it is about the Jimmies and Joes. And as long as I've covered this team, I really haven't seen an offensive line play this poorly. They're great. They're great at pass protection. They struggled a little bit against SMU last week, but through the first 3 games, they were great. They'd only allowed 1 sack. So if you look at what they have, they've got some size. They've got guys that have played a lot of football, but for whatever reason, they just can't combine their run blocking skills to go along with their pass blocking skills. I don't know what it is. They're going to try to – AJ Ricker, coached at Kansas, he's going to try to maneuver his offensive line. He's going to cross-train guys to play guard and play tackle. I don't know what we're going to see on Saturday, Michael. I couldn't really tell you. I do know that Sonny said it's still an open competition for those starting 5 guys. I think at this point, you want to see something different. You want to see something change. You want to see not only in practice, we could hear about it all the time in practice. Well, we've already seen your run defense, TCU's run defense is not real strong in games. They're going to, if the offensive line is moving the ball on offense or in the run game in practice, then that's probably indicative of how bad the run defense is. We want to see it in a game. You want to see someone have a chance to come in during a game. Maybe some of those young guys that they have that they're expecting to be big-time players the next 2 or 3 years, maybe throw them out there and see what they could do. I don't know what the answer is. I've never seen it like this. I've been around since 2005. I've never seen an offensive line struggle this much when it comes to creating run lanes. And right now, the running back room, you have Cam Cook. He's struggled a little bit. I think it's because of not having run blocking. I mean, but now, last week, I've defended the guy all year, but sometimes last week when he'd have a little sliver of a lane, he would bounce it outside. And when you start seeing running backs do that, you know it's a problem. So it's huge, huge issues right now for TCU not to even be able to go out and get a half yard for a first down. That was the issue last week against SMU. They couldn't convert a 3rd and half yard. Very next play, they try an option play. Josh Hoover fumbles. They pick it up and run it back for 6. So you get that first down, you probably don't have that defensive touchdown. So just those minimal things, if you can figure out a way to get any kind of semblance of a run game, you're probably looking at a different team right now for TCU.
Great stuff. Well, we can wrap up with this, Jeremy. What are your expectations for this game? I know I checked before you jumped on. I think the betting spread is about 2.5 right now, with KU being favored. What are your expectations for this game? How do you feel like this one's going to play out?
I think it's going to be close. Like I said earlier, I think Kansas has a lot of talent. Obviously, they've got a senior-heavy team. They've got a lot of experience out there. I think TCU does have a little bit better athletes in some areas. I feel like if they can go up there and if they can at least make Jalen throw a little bit more, they can be successful. I don't want to say that the thing with the UCF game, they wanted KJ Jefferson to throw, and although he didn't put up huge numbers, he didn't turn over the ball, and he was very consistent throwing the play action and hit some good plays downfield. So
yeah,
that's something that I could see Jalen Daniels do. And I still feel like I said before the year, I felt like Daniels, even though this is a really, really quarterback heavy conference with a lot of talented guys, I feel like Jalen Daniels is still one of those top quarterbacks in the league. And so it's going to start with slowing him down. It's going to start with not allowing the big plays for Devin to run happy out there and just get big chunks of yardage, 10, 12, 15 yards. They've got to hold KU to under 150 to 200 yards. I mean, if they don't do that, it's going to be a long day. And right now, I don't have those high expectations for them to do that. It's not bashing the kids. It's not bashing the coaching staff. It's looking up the internet and seeing, hey, they gave up 289 yards to UCF. Hey, they gave up 230-something yards to SMU. They can't stop the run right now. And then switching over to offense, if they can't run the ball, it's not going to be good for TCU. It's just simply not. You cannot win football games if you can't stop the run and you can't have any kind of run game. And that's something that if they don't get it figured out, it could be a very long season. They all know it. I mean, Sonny Dykes said it's painfully obvious that we cannot stop the run right now. And they've got to get it fixed. Can they get it fixed against KU? I don't know. But if they can, that's a huge win in my book. I don't care if KU is 1-3 right now. They're preseason top 25. That's a great win. And if TCU can come up there to Kansas City and do that at Arrowhead Stadium. But if they don't, I don't know what the rest of the season is going to look like for them.
I feel like that's the same feel around KU right now. If they don't win this game, you're really scratching your head like, man, what does the rest of the year look like? That's how competitive the Big 12 is, and that's what makes it an exciting product every week. Jeremy, thanks a bunch for your time. For folks that want to go check out some of your TCU content, where all can they check that stuff out?
Head over to hornfrogblitz.com. We've been around I think we've been on 27 now for about 9 years. Jamie Plunkett and I have been around the program since the early 2000s. I've been around since 2005, and I think he's been around right around the same time. So we got plenty of years of coverage, football, basketball. Jamie's awesome at basketball coverage, baseball, everything you guys want to dive into. If you want to find out more about TCU, head over to hornfrogblitz.com.
Awesome. Thanks a bunch, Jeremy. We'll see you this weekend.
Thanks, Michael.
All right. A huge thank you to Jeremy for taking the time to talk to us. Again, make sure you're checking out all the stuff at hornfrogblitz.com. Now we can dive into this more from a KU perspective, having Jack Ritter join the show again. Jack, how's the week been for you? I know it's been a little bit busy as you weigh all the school stuff while also helping us out with stuff on the website. How's the week been for you?
It's been a little busy. Things are, cranking up as the school year gets going, but got to make some time for the podcast, right?
Exactly. Let's get into this, Jack. I think the biggest thing for me going into this game, I'm really interested to see how this offense looks for KU. Sonny Dykes made the comment during the week, right? 75% to 80% run plays for KU is what he's expecting. Jeff Grimes, I thought, had an interesting kind of quote back saying, well, I'd expect him to say that, not only considering how good KU's been, but more so because of what has happened to TCU the last 2 weeks. I know you wrote about that a little bit on the website in your Jeff Grimes notebook. what are you looking to see from the offense this week? Does it start with the run game? I mean, you're looking to see a much more run-oriented scheme this week. Like, what are some of the things you're gonna be looking for from the offense?
Yeah, the past couple weeks we've seen TCU give up quite a bit of yards to both UCF and SMU, as I already wrote about in that notebook. Like you mentioned, I think Sonny Dykes completely hit the nail on the head when he said KU's going to run it 80% of the time because that's what's working for the Kansas offense, right?
Yeah.
Jalen Daniels has 7 interceptions on the season, and the steady and consistent play right now is to run the ball. That's why we're seeing, like Jeff Grimes talked about, keeping it balanced on third and medium or even third and long sometimes, running the ball on third down, running the ball in crucial situations because that's what works for KU. And for TCU, that's what's really hurt them the past couple games.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the numbers for TCU, it's pretty staggering, right? About 290 yards rushing against UCF, and then another 240 yards rushing against SMU. And the thing you got to remember about the SMU game too is the fact that the SMU defense had a scoop and score. There was a special teams touchdown, so this wasn't even like SMU was trying to grind out the game offensively. This was a game where SMU's offense, put up 60 or put up 66 points as a team. And it wasn't like the offense was out there for 90 plays or something. It was a very kind of different sort of performance. So you might see, about 240 rushing yards. You're like, oh, okay, but then you factor in just how efficient they have been doing that. TCU definitely has struggled with that. And I think for KU, I think TCU is just going to stack the box and they're going to try and force KU to get out of running the ball frequently. And I'm really fascinated to see how kind of the passing attack looks for KU because it feels like Jalen Daniels has taken steps forward, right, Jack? Like you look over the course of the first few weeks, I know I joked with Kevin about this, you go from 3 interceptions to 2 interceptions to 1. Is this the week it's going to be 0? I'm really fascinated to see if Jalen can continue to improve and how the play action passing game looks because anecdotally, I've not looked at the numbers, but it doesn't feel like KU's run a ton of play action passing this year. And granted, a part of that, I think, against West Virginia specifically was the fact that the offensive line really wasn't pass blocking well. And so you can't run play action if your offensive line isn't really pass blocking super well. So I think that dynamic on offense is going to be really interesting to watch. What's your feel with Jalen? I know there are some interesting quotes. I think, Lance said this week that he feels like Jalen has improved. Somebody asked Jeff Grimes, hey, Lance said this, what do you think? And Grimes was like, oh, I'm not going to disagree with, Coach Leipold. And it's like, yeah, of course you're not. But what do you think about Jalen? I mean, do you expect another step forward? Do you think what we saw against West Virginia is now going to be the baseline? What are your expectations?
I think that's a good way to put it, that West Virginia is sort of like the baseline. Jeff Grimes also said that this is very much could be a result of Jalen spending a lot of the offseason hurt or not being able to get all those practice reps in. And so, obviously Lance Leipold didn't want to say rust a couple weeks ago, but as the rust wears off for Jalen Daniels and as we get further into the season, maybe we'll get into those games where he's not throwing a pick. But honestly, I think a valid and fair expectation is a game like the West Virginia game, where we saw some good things, but we also still kind of saw those mistakes just in a few situations gear up. I do think having Zabrowski on the sideline helped Jalen a little bit. Jeff Grimes said he hadn't really asked Jalen if that made him more comfortable, but he said it certainly seemed like it during the game. So I think the West Virginia game is a fair baseline, as you said, for expectations moving forward.
Yeah, and I thought it was an interesting comment from Grimes. Obviously, I think, as well documented in spring, right? The fact that Jalen started by being limited. By the end of it, he was doing some 11-11 stuff, but this wasn't like a full off season for Jalen where from, the first spring practice until the final camp practice, he did every single 11-on-11 rep. And I think that has shown itself, right? I think a couple of those deep passes against West Virginia showed how there's a little bit of rust, right? I think about that one on the far right sideline. at least from Jalen's perspective, like, the one that
Mm,
falls just like 2 feet away from Luke Grimm. It's like, 2 years ago, early last year, that feels like that's something that probably drops. And I think you're just seeing some of that rust come off over time. And I think that's what makes this game super interesting. Because I think for KU, like broadly, this is now you got to show it game. Because if you start Big 12 play 0-2 and the losing streak stretches to 4, all of a sudden, like, you're really scratching your head, like, where are the wins going to come from? Because then it's a road trip
yeah.
at Arizona State, right? That's a team that's going to be a night game uh, there. They have played pretty good football under Kenny Dillingham in their second year. Then you have the bye week. You play Houston. That's a game KU will win. But then it's K-State on the road, another bye week. Iowa State at home, BYU on the road. Like, that's not an easy month there in terms of just games. So this feels like for KU, it's I don't know, must win. It's a season defining game. And if KU wins, like, I think there's a reason to believe that if they play a clean football game, that, okay, can this team then put it together? And then Lance Leipold said, right, if you get 2, then all of a sudden you get the momentum, the confidence back, and maybe you can put a little streak together. So I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a roundabout way of saying, Jack, I think this is a really important game for Kansas.
I totally agree. Like, for these kids, momentum is everything in life and on the field. And so you really need to look at this game and you need to say, okay, either the momentum is going to keep going against us, or maybe we can have a chance where it's going for us. And you go into this next difficult month here with at least one conference win under your belt. It helps you a lot. And, we talked about it a couple weeks ago, like, was UNLV a bounce back game or things like that? And I think, when it comes to this game, like, just throw the expectations out the window, throw everything out the window, and KU just focus on the one game. We've kind of seen a little bit late in game, these players get a little stressed out, or at least it's showing in their play. Like, sometimes especially with the defense, they just look like they're less proactive and they're more reactive to things. And so that might be a result of some of the pressures and things like that. So I just hope they're throwing out the expectations and that they're just going into this game and saying, win this game. That's it.
Yeah, and I think that's something,
the
right, Lance Leipold talked about, was the fact that guys are straining to make the play. And I think that's probably a good way to frame it too, right? Guys want to make the play, not a play. And you can go through a lot of times during this 3-game losing streak when guys have tried to make a big play instead of just taking what is there to be had. And that can be in so many different ways, right? It can be Jalen Daniels in the decisions. It can be Kobe Bryant at the end of the first half against UNLV, trying to go for a pick instead of just playing through the ball and through the man and trying to break up the pass. Like, there's instances in every single game where KU has clearly had guys that are trying to make the big play that changes the game, that changes the season, that puts everything right. And that's just not a way to play. And I think this TCU game, and maybe, I don't know, maybe playing at Arrowhead will change things or make it feel a little bit different. But this is a game I feel like, for KU, they really do have to put together kind of the clean 4 quarters of football. Because if Jack, we see the same mistakes again this week, right? Missed tackles, interceptions, missed assignments. Like, it's at that point of the year now, and you're like, all right, at what point do you show you can actually clean this stuff up? Because it's been a lot of the same mistakes, it feels like, really over the last couple of weeks too.
Definitely. Totally agree.
Yeah, well, let's get into some of the defense here for KU then, because I think, right, TCU, what we're talking about this with Jeremy, this TCU offense is so interesting because it's almost like the inverse of KU, where they have a good passing attack with some really talented wide receivers, a good quarterback, but their run game has just been atrocious. And this, to me, screams like a bounce back game for Kobe Bryant, Melo Dotson, the secondary. Like, they're going to have the opportunity to set everything that went wrong last week. They'll have the opportunity to set that right this week.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to that TCU run game, Jeremy Clark, he wrote about it this week, and he said, there's an open competition in the offensive line. Coach Dyke said that every every spot, there's always competition going. They're never set. And he said that since he's started covering TCU years ago, that he's never seen a more ineffective offensive line in the run game. So when we think about the fact that KU doesn't really need to worry about a quarterback who can run all over the field, or you don't even need to really worry a ton about this TCU rush game, you can stick to what you're good at, and that is Kobe Bryant, Melo Dotson, that secondary, just playing ball out there. And so I totally agree. I think it's an opportunity for a bounce back, but you wrote about this last week after the West Virginia game. Can KU get pressure on the quarterback, even if, and I'm pretty sure you wrote this, even if you have two Hall of Fame cornerbacks out there, like they're still going to give up big plays if you can't get pressure on the quarterback. So, as TCU is considering maybe some offensive line movement and things like that, I am interested to see how KU will reevaluate getting pressure on the quarterback, forcing him to throw the ball quicker or sooner. I know TCU already kind of does that. They get the ball out pretty quick, but they just need to get pressure going on the quarterback.
Yeah, and I wonder if someone like Bai Jobe, maybe, and the fact that he now doesn't have the club on his hand, maybe he's someone that can benefit. In a situation like this where, KU really hasn't gotten much pass rush from that weak side defensive end spot, maybe Bai Jobe is the type of guy that can come in and provide some of that spark. He's a high effort player, still learning, as we've covered a lot with Bai Jobe. He's someone that, started playing football pretty late. In just the broad scheme of things, right? Started playing football in high school. And, this is probably his 4th or 5th year of playing. So it's not like someone that's been doing it for years and years and is a refined player, even though he's young. Like, he's still learning. And so I wonder if a game like this, it's like see ball, get ball. Go get after the quarterback, and try and get some pressure. Because I think KU's got some really good production from Jeremy Robinson on the strong side. I think he's had a really good start to the year. I think Dylan Woodkey maybe has been the most underrated player for KU on defense to start the season. Like, he's made plays consistently. And so it really just comes down to that weak side role. And can Dean Miller get the pressures? He really hasn't so far. And that makes me wonder how they're going to try and handle it, because TCU is a team that does like to get the ball out quick. So that's going to make for a game that's super big on tackling, and one that's going to be really important that KU's cornerbacks don't have any big busts, because wide receivers for TCU, they are really, really good. Jack, any final thoughts on this matchup? Any other things you're kind of looking for that we haven't hit on yet?
Well, I think just the last thing that we haven't really hit on is, Cornell Wheeler and the role that he could or could not play in this game. He went down with an injury in that West Virginia game, came back out, and just, visually, I saw him limping like after plays to the sideline and things like that. So, for KU's sake, people better hope that he's back out there, because when it comes to tackling and things like that, you don't exactly have known commodities when you get deeper into that linebacker room. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Cornell's been great. I think Cornell's had a really great year, and I think losing him would be a huge blow, because so much of the offseason was about having him step into that middle linebacker role. And all of a sudden, if in, week 5, you're looking and saying, all right, you don't have that guy right now, that's a pretty big loss. So we'll have to see where it goes for him on Saturday. If he doesn't play, sounds like probably JB Brown or Tywone Berryhill. One of those two will have the green dot. I'd probably lean towards JB Brown. Lance Leipold had said during Hawk Talk, I want to say maybe, Jack, that JB would be the guy that have the dot, the mic in his helmet if Cornell wasn't out there. So maybe look for JB to play more of that mic spot, Tywone Berryhill to play that weak side linebacker spot. So that's some good stuff, Jack. Thanks a bunch for giving us some of your insight. Give everyone your Twitter account so they can all go follow your tweets during Saturday's game and all throughout the season.
Yeah, the Twitter is JackRritt, real quick and simple. Jack R. Ritt.
We love quick and simple. Awesome. Thanks a bunch, Jack. We'll talk to you again next week. All righty. Thanks a bunch for Jack for taking some time to talk with us today. Let's run over some quick recruiting stuff for this week. Obviously, playing on a Saturday really helps KU. It's not easy to get high school recruits to games on Friday nights when they have games, and also on Thursday nights when it's also, a school night and they have the game the next day. So for KU, this is the first really big opportunity for the coaching staff to have high school recruits on campus. Probably in the mid-20s in terms of high school visitors. I'm going to have a list up on fog.net on Friday morning with your full list preview, who you need to know. A couple of names, guys that are going to be there for this week. Notably from in-state, Ian Premer's a top tight end. He's from Great Bend, Kansas, someone that camped at KU over the summer. He's been to campus multiple times, really priority target for the coaching staff at this point in time. On the local front, someone like Juju Marks is expected to be there for the game. And, he's someone that KU obviously has committed and is going to get the chance to watch KU play at Arrowhead. And then one more guy I think probably keep an eye on it is Derek Garcia, a quarterback from California. He did a big visit swing over the summer where I think he saw like KU, Minnesota, K-State. He will be back on campus. He will be able to see campus again if he'd like, but obviously he'll get to see KU play in person at Arrowhead Stadium. So it's going to be a pretty busy sideline there pregame. So I'll be down there taking some photos of guys and getting all that for our VIP subscribers. And that's what I got. That's our podcast. I think we're probably about 45 minutes at the end of the day. Not too bad. Hope everyone has a great start to the weekend. Hope if you're making it to the game, hopefully travel goes well. Hopefully getting in the stadium, everything goes smoothly. You never know. It'll be very interesting to see what this atmosphere is like for the weekend game. And as always, stay tuned to the fog.net podcast. We'll have another episode for you on Sunday. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that little bell right next to the subscribe button. That'll give you a little notification whenever we have a new video posted. That's podcast, just post-game videos, interviews, all that sorts of stuff. And if you're listening on your podcast platform of choice, please make sure you leave a rating and review. Those go a long way in helping us out. So thanks always for listening. We'll talk to you all on Sunday.